thank you for staying in the room. I see a few people leaving, but it's all right, I'll let you off. Forgive me for hobbling up, so I'm just getting over a broken kneecap. So I'm in my trainers today, so I hope you forgive me. That was a hard, tough act to follow. Well done, David. You know, no pressure or anything. Hopefully I won't bore you too much. Some of you, most of you, will probably know most of this, and really my role today is to share some of my own professional working experiences with you and to hopefully answer some questions that you may have. Because journalists, many of whom are my best friends, are not that accessible in today's industry. So it's my job today to tell you a little bit about getting hold of us. Okay, so I'm going to do a little brief introduction about me, tell you a little bit about what we want as journalists and editors, talk a little bit about connecting, okay, and networking. Can't stand that phrase, but it's true, we all need to do it. The editor's essential, so really what my bosses are looking for. Go over a couple of case studies and then have a little bit of time at the end to have a bit of a Q&A session. So who am I? So my name's Leigh Purves. I've been in the industry for quite some time now. I think my first job as a journalist was with Metro Radio in Newcastle upon Tyne way back when. Well, no, actually, my first job was at Asian Radio in Bradford, and then I moved up to work at Metro Radio, and then I moved down to London. So I'm a bit weird in that I've worked in print and digital broadcast as well, whereas most people choose one or the other. I've also obviously dabbled in PR and comms over the years. It tends to pay a bit more sometimes. I'm also a qualified lecturer and head up a degree in media law, journalism and PR as well. And I work very closely with the National Council of Trained Journalists and the PRCA as well. So quite busy. So what do we want as journalists? Ultimately, okay, ignore the yellow stilettos. That is what I'd like. I'd always cover stories about fashion, heels, broken kneecap or not. But the reason that image is there is to plant in your minds, which David touched on actually so well, that it's so important that you're pitching stories that are right for that demographic and actually right for that journalist or the on-desk editor. Don't be afraid to use direct message on Twitter, for example, to get hold of us. I'll come on to that in a couple of minutes. And the title of any email that you send is absolutely crucial. Give us a reason to actually open the email though, okay? Which I'll also come on to in a minute. Often I email my own editors or colleagues and just don't hear back, and you can't take it personally. It is just ridiculously busy. On an average day on a news desk, I get more than 250, 260 emails. And actually having the time and the headspace to come up and check those emails. Certainly working for a national, I'd be looking at doing outputting 50 stories a day. And on top of that, social media. And then I've got to do exclusives, the digital side. So there's a lot to go at. So reading emails, unfortunately, isn't always my priority. I know some journalists at nationals really have more than 6,500 emails on a day-to-day basis. So please don't take it personally if people don't get back to you. I mentioned DMs on Twitter. Social media is there for a reason. We all use it. That good old LinkedIn has its purposes. Also look out for relevant handles on Twitter. You can always tell if journalists use Twitter to get stories from. Don't be afraid to get in touch. You'll soon know whether that journalist picks that up and uses that as a way of getting stories or not. So don't forget, pictures, of course, can make brilliant stories. Make sure that you copyright all the images that you send across. I've had some absolute clangers before where we've got into hot water several times because, for example, an agency has sent over a press release with an image that was with the wrong caption and the wrong copyright, and it's gone. There was once that it went to print, and then the photographer rang up and was like, hang on a minute, where'd you get that image from? Okay, and little things like that do happen, so just be really mindful of that, okay? And there's nothing worse than receiving and reading a press release that hasn't got a decent quality image either. And it might be that sometimes you just put your files in Dropbox and you're pitching with 5 bullet points, so you don't send the image across. But if it's a story that is largely dominated by the image, then make sure that obviously we can see that when you send the content across. So, as everything, the newsroom is fast evolving. I think we're going to talk about AI a little bit later on inside the newsroom. But obviously since lockdown, journalists are harder to get hold of than ever before, right? I mean, you all know as well, hybrid working in newsrooms still very much exists. Even in broadcast, I could be reporting on the news in the Lake District from my studio in North Leeds. So, it's all evolving, all hybrid working. So let's talk about getting hold of journalists, because ultimately that's what we all want to do. So I'm still quite rare in that I do answer my phone when I can. Not everyone does. I'm quite nice. I always have been like that, because I think, on one hand, you're doing me a favour, I'm doing you a favour. It works both ways. But ultimately, phone calls are rarely answered by journalists. And as I said before, the emails are ridiculous. A few hours off work and there's more than 100 emails. So sometimes emails do go to junk. Again, don't take it personally. But I'd say follow it up twice. And if you're still ignored, it's a definite no, okay? Cat food in a health section, it's not going to work. So be really, really thorough about what you're pitching and who you're pitching to. So establishing relationships, okay, it's really, really important. Face-to-face networking, no one has time for. Time is all of our main commodity, right? But people do want to get back to networking, and we are, more than ever, trying to get back to that. But unfortunately, the workload is increasing. So how do you get through to us? It's really tricky. You've got to make sure that whatever you're inviting us to is absolutely mind-blowing. It's awesome, okay? There's no point in offering, something with, I don't know, off the top of my head, Gemma Collins, for example, who's fronting a new health campaign. Would I look to come down to a press launch, which is also live on TikTok? I want more than that. I want to have that exclusive, but I want the best line. I need that. I don't just want a fancy invite offering me freebies. I want to know what my news consumers are going to get on the back of that, okay? So really think it through. So with creative items, for example, not that we do desk drops anymore and get desk drops, but if you are sending something out, make sure you're doing it, not just scattergunning, because we can tell when you are, but, make sure that you've really thought it through. And again, it's going back to that cat food in a health section. Is it really worth sending me a product of cat food when I'm talking about diabetes or heart attacks in humans? Lead times I'll come on to again a little bit further along this afternoon. So you all know about lead times, depending on which media outlet you're targeting. Obviously very different with digital. Dailies, for example, will start 7:30 in the morning. We'll go into a news conference at 10 a.m. So I need to make sure that I am taking in the stories that I'm going to argue to have published by 8:30 in the morning. So I want that your copy at the top of my news feed and my inbox by 6:30 in the morning. That's an ideal time to get some notice from us, okay? We also have a later conference at Dailies, which will be about 4:30, 5 o'clock, which then sets out and finalises in stone what is going to press that night. And also we'll have a separate conference around that time for online. And again, probably about 9:30 in the evening, which will set out the stall for the evening editor who's coming in to do the evening shift, okay? And sometimes, certainly in print, and of course digital's a given, but certainly with print, we do have a bit of leeway to change things until we go off stone, as we say, about midnight. So with broadcast, okay, so you've got to start thinking differently. So you want to start thinking about forward planning. The planning desk is who you need to get hold of, okay? There's no harm in trying to establish relationships with researchers, forward planners, mid-term, short-term, and long lead. That's what you want to be thinking about with broadcast. Monthly magazines. So, for example, I've been working on a feature for Christmas. Where are we, June? The last call for that feature will be end of July, early August. So you're looking at about 3-month lead, really, 3-month lead time for monthly magazines as well. So again, bear that in mind. Be really proactive when you're pitching and positive, as hard as that can be, especially when you just get someone saying, no, no, no. Just think positive. So to give you an example, during the pandemic in lockdown, at the Daily Mail, everyone groans at this point, we were really looking for positive angles because as it was such a hard time for everyone, I think we were tasked with at one point creating 110 different stories relating to COVID every single day. Okay, so there was space to fill, okay, in news. And it was really, really hard. And actually, Facebook was quite a good platform for us to get messages from the public with stories, offering us stories. And it's brilliant, actually. So always remember, social media, it's not just Twitter and LinkedIn and all that. Think Facebook, especially with broadcast. That's a really popular platform for just messaging stories in as well. Well-being always works really well. Human angle, human interest stories, always likely to be more interested in those. If you're stuck and need to get something away, as we say, just think, is there a human angle? What's the story? How can it affect communities? And actually, now the focus is very much on hyperlocal communities, even within national media. We're all about building those communities and ensuring that our consumers feel that they're part of a community. So don't just think communities, regional press. It's not at all. The nationals are all hankering after that as well, especially on the social side as well. So turnaround time. So lots of staff have been made redundant in journalism across the board, obviously especially since COVID. Remember that content is planned in advance, and some publications have shorter lead times, which I mentioned before. But you set an agenda. Don't be frightened about this. Come to us. Help us set the agenda. Leigh, what are you working on? What are you working on in January? I don't know that now, but for some of the monthlies, I'll know that within about 4 or 5 weeks. I'll know what the landscape's looking like. It's just a case of you knowing that as well. Be proactive and reactive. I love a bit of newsjacking that then turns into another campaign that then creates more news. And bounce ideas around as well. Some of the best campaigns that have had loads of coverage have started with a phone call with somebody either in-house or someone from a PR digital agency who've basically been talking about something, and we've just chatted and said, oh yeah, it could be quite interesting. And it started off as 3 bullet points in email, and it's grown and grown and grown. And actually, because of the lack of time, certainly that we have as journalists, that person has helped me shape the copy. Hyperlinks, obviously David mentioned those, uber important. I, as a journalist, can never guarantee that that link will run, but I will always do my best. Not everyone's quite so nice. And if your client, for example, moans to you that the hyperlink's been broken and it hasn't run as they want, always try and get hold of the journalist whose name was by the particular story, that individual story. Now, whilst I talk about hyperlinks being really important, I have to say that a couple of weeks ago, I was on a regional news desk, and it was a really nice experience. It's not always nice, because this particular paper, title shall I say, actually encourage hyperlinks with all the content that we're churning out, because it actually helps with our rankings and our SEO. However, most of the nationals that I work on are not quite so formidable and encouraging. It's always worth bearing in mind. Okay, so we're talking about pitching today. So remember that images is so important, copyright check and quality. Explain everything, but not so much detail that I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to give you some examples in a minute. It's great to have a headline, but you've got to also explain why it's relevant now. And I mentioned before, bullet points, 5 bullet points. Just think of us like children, as 5-year-old children. We have a really small amount of attention, not just because I'm a Gemini, but we do. So we need it broken down, and for you to simplify it as much as possible. So effective pitches versus non-effective pitches. We want a great headline, bullet points, absolutely fine, as basic as they are, super tight copy, content is more important to us than length. The interest is then piqued, and we'll take it from there. But also remember that a lot of the time we share content. So if you don't get it in one regional paper, but you know that paper exists in a different city and you're going to try a different news desk there, we get really cross with that because we all talk, especially at conference and over Teams. So we are aware of what's being pitched and potentially regurgitated, and then you don't want to get blacklisted for doing that. So also be really mindful around that as well. This was a really effective release, actually, really totally basic, as you can see. It was about Manuka honey, and their great promise. They claim to be really good with this particular product as a treatment from serious lung infections. Now, this story started off on diabetes.co.uk. It absolutely went viral, global, because it was really well-crafted copy, really beautiful images that came over, and obviously it had a human interest angle as well. This was really recent, actually. Someone was very proactive ahead of that thing that we had, the heat wave. And actually it started off as a really simple infographics. We love listicles as well with numbers, but dead easy to get away. Heat wave nightmare, expert tips on how to sleep in 30-degree heat. It just absolutely boomed. This particular expert was all over Sky, you name it, got so much coverage and links away, they didn't know how lucky they were. A non-effective release, so the subject line, this is something that came to me the other week. I just pulled it out. Media op. Elevate the unique energy of numbers all around you. World-renowned numerologist explains how. That was in the headline. It was a bit like, whoa, subject. It was like, not the headline, the subject. The top line, Bob Trollope, Joe Blogs, whoever, a world-renowned numerologist can help your audience understand how to elevate the unique energy of the numbers. And it was just so long-winded and such gobbledygook. It just didn't break it down. It would have been better to actually put it in as an infographics and numbers and send out a listicle. So just really think about the words that are being used as well. Also, there was no image pitched to me on a news desk when I was actually covering a really serious court reporting case, and I was on the court reporting desk. And the relevance was, again, it's the cat food. That's the cat food. Okay, so what not to put in headlines? You will love this story. Oldest woman in the world puts lifelong down to ... Ah, okay. That's not going to make me read it. Dear Leah, you must read this. In capitals. That's not my name, and I'm definitely not going to read it. Dear Leigh Purves. Seriously, I've had all sorts. 26th of January 23, the actual date I received this was on the 20th of February 23. Financial advice from a debt advisor in Manchester, but it was pitched to me in London on a news desk. An interview opportunity with rare art collector. Who, why, where, totally vague. And I don't think it actually specified that until like 4 paths down. Case study, so pictures we've absolutely loved. Okay, so this was a really recent campaign by Dove, actually. It was all about self-esteem. It was a lovely project they did with young people. And it was brilliant because it covered so many different topics that are really topical, from mental health to body issues. It was just to lack of confidence. It was just so lovely and brilliant. There were so many pictures and images that they gave us, and we could do so much with it. So there was a lot of different strands to that. Pictures with loads, too many to mention. Anything that's supposed to be natural but totally staged. Any images not passed on in truth, and that has happened, going back to copyright or with the correct caption. And pictures which, again, are of really bad quality. So a few takeaways. So always make sure the timeline for pitching you are on top of, as well as the strong ideas that you're pitching. Think really clearly as to how the journalists might want to be contacted. I'm sure we've all had it where people have just gone, no, no. So there are no set rules with press release style, remember that as well, but it's quicker to read if embedded into an email, not as an attachment, but that's personal preference. With images, files can be in Dropbox. And moderating teams just means be mindful of moderating teams, only your editors mainly have the power to change social settings on stories, which is something worth bearing in mind. And quality data is important. If you're promoting a survey to me, make sure the data is quality and from a large pool, substantial pool. So I always look for 2,500 as an absolute minimum. Okay, 200 is just an absolute no, it's not going to work. And if you do say, I've had really good stories actually that have come from a report, for example, a report where they've had 8 case studies and they've argued, said, well, it's been a fantastic story, but I'm like, yeah, but the data's not there, the evidence isn't there. And the PR's argued and said, yeah, but the interviews are so lengthy, they're like 5,000 words each, and that it can be arguable depending on what that is. But as a general rule, 2,500 words when it comes to surveys. And that's about everything from me. I'm sure I've got lots of answers, hopefully, for any questions. It's really nice to speak to you.